of Dr. Carr's ideas and what we've discussed, and definitely update our training.
Yes, I think we have to adjust and readjust our training,
And do
methods
some role
also.
playing. I think role playing is going to be very important, and having team members really get comfortable to this way of communication, because in the past, we have had to address some issues and concerns where certain housekeepers perhaps might be a little shy, or maybe English is their second language, and the communication already had somewhat of a small barrier. So it's going to be really important to get everyone to feel comfortable. We had to be uncomfortable cleaning a COVID rooms and get comfortable with that. We had to be comfortable in wearing N95 masks all the time and goggles as we do our work. So I think that it's very important to role play, very important to have robust dialogue and conversations, and start to get some great new ideas from our frontline team members.
Mentioning and wearing a mask, I was wearing a mask today, and it was 70, 78 degrees outside. I'm walking on the street, and it's uncomfortable.
Very.
Imagine the patient now walking from outside inside. And I think Liz mentioned yesterday, it starts at the door, right? They walk from outside inside. They're at the front door, and they're being greeted by not so cordial person at the door. And they're already cranky because of the mask and the heat, and summertime is coming. How do we combat that? How do we work on that?
Well, I think it will have to be, I know the focus is environmental services, but I also think that we need to realize that this is not just a one category or one department issue, but we have to do, once we come up with a particular method, we have to use this method across the board. One of the things that we know is the front desk secretary, front desk staff, making sure that they are using eye contact. But I say eye contact with a leery voice, because I do understand cultural components have to be taken into consideration. For instance, I'm not sure if you all are really knowledgeable. You all have lived and you have experience working with different cultures. So you may know that eye-to-eye contact is very respected in the United States culture. But if you do it within an Asian culture, it might seem a sign of disrespect. So if you have someone coming in from a different cultural background who that is not their norm, that might be offensive. So we also have to keep all of those things into consideration. We can have Muslim couples walking in, and if there's a male figure having eye contact with the female, that can be offensive. Correct. So we have to think of all these different components, and then we have to, as Liz said, recreate how we train. And in order to be effective, we have to educate. Back to that word, educate, educate, educate. If we are not expressing or explaining and teaching our staff these different methods and this information, then it'll just fall on deaf ears, and then we'll constantly get that feedback. So maybe we need to include a cultural component, maybe 5 minutes each session, and use it more often, that we teach about different cultures to look out.
Well, I think I incorporate that in my training pieces, but I'll have to tweak it now a little more, because now you're not seeing them. You're not quite seeing who these people are because they're behind masks now.
Yeah.
I remember.
I think there's. I'm sorry, Deanna. I was going to say that I absolutely agree with Dr. Carr, because in Middle Eastern cultures, particularly among Muslims, eye contact between different sexes sometimes can be seen as inappropriate. So I definitely think that we're going to have to talk about cultural differences and sensitivity. Absolutely. And then the other patient population that we need to be concerned about is our pediatric population, because coming to the hospital for our younger patients is already so super scary. And what about now when you can't see someone's face? A mask can be, like a superhero, but can also be very, very scary to some people.
I know that's for a fact, because as a young housekeeper and a transporter, I transported a lady. I think she was Indian, from the Middle East, from India. And she had, I'm not sure what it's called, but the red, mark on her forehead to identify. Now I know what it means that she's married. And I asked her, what does that mean? Because I did not know. And she was very offended. And I left it alone, took her where she needed to go. And I needed to know. So I made it my mission to find out, because most of the people around me didn't know. And, later on in the years is when I found out what it really meant. And I still don't understand why she was offended, because it was a question, what does that mean? So
yeah, I'm confused why she was offended. I would actually be elated that you are trying to learn about my culture.
Correct.
That goes back to different personalities, different cultures, different people.
One thing I love is cultures. I try my best to find out more and more and more about all types of cultures, food, different things. And more and more that you try to find out, you find out that, everyone is not happy about you trying to find out, for whatever reason it is. And even taking it back now to the front door of them now wearing a mask, and we cannot identify them by a first glance of what culture they are. It's going to be even more difficult if we misspeak and call them something else that they're not.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. One of the things I try to share with my students is that it is our responsibilities as providers of a service to be more familiar with the people that we service. So if we have to take time and look through the book and find out, like for instance, I worked at a local health center, and one of the things that I used to do before my feet were planted, before I started working full-time hours while I was in training, this was not a part of the official training from the job, but what I did was I did my own research. What is the percentage of this population, that population, this population that come into the door? And so as a supervisor and someone who is the overseer of duties for staff, maybe that's something that you can do. So that way, once you are familiar with the percentages of people who's coming, you're not always going to be 100% accurate, but if you are more likely to hit the mark on what cultural differences these people may have that are coming in the door, you're more likely to show them that they're appreciated, you respect them because you took the time to find out. The population that I service was Asian population, so I found out a few things about the Asian population, and that's why I could share about the eye contact thing. Another thing that I found out was the African. It was a large African, various, but more so Liberia and Nigeria. So I just took the time to find out a few basic things. So when they come in and I'm able to say like welcome in their language or make a sound, a gesture that is done in their culture, that they're more comfortable and they realize that I care about them because I took the time to find out before they actually walked in the door. Of course, there were a few times where I was not 100% right. I'm like, hey, are you from? Because I'm big on culture. I like to learn accents, and I would say maybe 90-something% of the time I'm correct, and then several times, maybe close to 10%, I'm incorrect. But it's a way to open dialogue as well. No, I'm not. But they see that you're close and you thought about them, and you're willing to learn about their culture and who they are.
That is so true. That is so true. And I think that's what I was trying to do before I was almost beheaded. So, Liz, anything else to add?
Well, customer service, we spent a lot of time talking about body language and verbal communication and how your caregiver team being masked might be perceived. So I think our next session, we should probably really focus on, the HCAP survey and its return, right? So July 1st, again, we have a lot of hospitals where the HCAP survey was turned off essentially or suspended during our COVID-19 pandemic response to allow for hospital administrators, nurses, doctors, all of our really important care team and support departments to focus on safely caring for patients during COVID-19, and especially for environmental services, where our passion is how they clean these rooms safely. And now we have to talk about how we clean these rooms safely while making patients feel welcomed, making patients feel safe, and keeping, of course, our staff safe, but making sure that infection control is top of our list for priorities. So it's all about infection control. And I know that we're going to take a deep dive into cleaning COVID-19 rooms, occupied room cleans, discharge cleaning in upcoming podcasts. But certainly patients now more than ever want to make sure that when they're in the hospital that they are not going to come in without COVID-19 and perhaps get COVID-19 while they're in the hospital from a caregiver or from a unclean or not disinfected surface. So it's really important, always customer service, always patient care, but it's just as important to make sure that all the surfaces in the room are kept clean, kept disinfected, uncluttered, so we can clean appropriately, and that our team is wearing the right PPE, but also knows when to take that PPE off to prevent cross-contamination and when to perform hand hygiene. So we have lots to talk about. I know our time is almost up for this podcast, this session, but we definitely have some more things to talk about when we bring up HCAPs and the return of surveys being mailed out or sent out to our patients.
So I think our next topic should be touching also on safety, as Liz pointed out. And before we go, I want to mention that to ensure the stay meets every customer's satisfaction, it starts at the door. And we have to really readjust for everything to start at the door. Any entrance point that a patient or a guest or a customer or ourselves enter that door, and that interaction we have really will take us from that door to the floor. So thanks all for joining us. Dr. Carr, you had something to add?
I wanted to add, I know I threw it out, the superhero era. We also, and this is a good segue to remember that everybody who wore a mask was not a superhero. There were also villains. So we have to keep that in mind as well. So that's a good segue into safety. So that brings up other things for us to look and pay attention to. So we can't keep our backs turned at the people walking down the hallway because now they have on masks. New York is the epicenter of 9/11. Pennsylvania, we felt the rafters too, the whole United States. But we have to remember that we need to be more observant more than ever.